Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, one and all. This is the Board Executive Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District. All of us together in the well air-conditioned Peralta Oaks boardroom. Happily. It is Thursday, September 8th, 2022, beginning at 12:34 p.m. Recording Secretary Monique, would you please take the roll of the committee?
Yes, President Coffey.
Oh, here.
Sorry.
I thought that was an acknowledgement or something.
Oh, sorry.
Here.
Director Rosario,
Here.
Director Lane.
Here.
Park District staff participating in this meeting include General Manager Sabrina Landreth, AGM Lynn Borgout, AGM Christina Kelchner, Lisa Gorgon, Jason Rosenberg, Edward Willis, Ren Bates, Eric Fuller, Alex Caspera, and Brian Holt. Today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361. Board members and staff may participate via phone, video conferencing, and/or through a hybrid of in-person and remote attendance. We are providing live audio and video streaming. Members of the public wishing to make a public comment can do so: 1, live via Zoom; 2, by submitting an email; or 3, leaving a voicemail. This information is noted on the agenda. If there are no questions about the meeting procedures, we will begin.
Thank you, Monique. So the first matter on our agenda this afternoon is item 2, an ordinance of the East Bay Regional Park District amending ordinance 38, rules and regulations of the Park District to give the Park District nuisance abatement authority pursuant to the newly enacted AB 959. And Jason is presenting.
Good afternoon, President Coffey and members of the committee. Jason Rosenberg, Assistant General Counsel. And I'm really excited to be presenting this item today. It's been a long time coming with multiple departments working on this. And as you know, the Park District's core functions is stewardship of its natural resources. And part of that is to prevent unauthorized uses of parklands by third parties when park staff becomes aware of them. Over the years, the Park District has faced a variety of illegal encroachments, such as illegal diversions of streams onto private property for personal use, alteration of stream beds for private development, extension of backyards and decks onto neighboring Park District property, diversion of stormwater flow from private property onto Park District property. And that's just a few examples of the types of illegal encroachments that the Park District has faced over the years. AB 959, which was carried by Assemblymember Mullen, was a collaborative legislative effort with Mid-Penn and the East Bay Regional Park District, and it added Public Resources Code Section 5558.5 to the organizing statute, and it addresses this need to regulate unauthorized uses. It was signed last year on September 23rd, 2021. Prior to this ordinance, the statute being adopted, we, as a park district, did not have the full tools of resources at our disposal that cities and counties had, and specifically to address nuisances and illegal encroachments. For example, in the past, some of these illegal encroachments required us to write numerous kind of pleading letters and then eventually resort to civil proceedings in the court, and it was oftentimes costly, time-consuming, and not as effective as we would have liked in protecting parklands. So now that AB 959 is in place, we have the ability to adopt an ordinance that would declare an encroachment onto district lands as an illegal and a nuisance. And then we would also establish a procedure to collect abatement costs and penalties if the illegal encroachment is not addressed by the person causing the the encroachment. So attached to this staff report is Chapter 10, which would be added to Ordinance 38, and it would address these unlawful encroachments. In brief, Chapter 10 would authorize the Park District to do the following. And the main thing is to establish that any encroachment onto Park District land is unlawful and a nuisance, and then establishing a nuisance abatement procedure when we learn of illegal encroachments. We would also be able to collect abatement and related administrative costs related to addressing that encroachment. It's issue administrative penalties, as well as recovering attorney's fees in any civil action or nuisance abatement proceeding that proceeds through to finality. Finally, if we do assess penalties or costs on a person causing an encroachment and they do not pay, we have the ability to record a lien against the property if they are not paid. These are all really valuable tools that cities and counties have used over the years, and by virtue of us being a public agency formed under the Public Resources Code, we wanted that to be explicit in the code to allow us to do these same things. Additionally, this new chapter would give the district the ability to enforce park use rules by administrative citation. So previously, violation of Ordinance 38 rules such as dog walking, bicycle, campground curfew would require the police department to visibly see the violation in place and issue a criminal citation. Now they can issue administrative citations that would be akin to a parking citation and be processed that manner. So this gives the police department additional tools to address park use violations as well. That is in essence what we're asking the executive committee to review and make a recommendation to the board of directors to adopt the proposed ordinance. And I'm available to answer any questions that the executive committee may have.
Directors, questions? Director Rosario?
Thank you. This is, I think this is a great event, and but I do have some questions. Is there a scenario where the encroachment is so egregious that would be criminal versus administrative?
Yes, for sure. It gives us the option to proceed in whatever manner that we believe is the most effective method to address the encroachment. It also gives us the ability, if an encroachment is an immediate threat to public health and safety, to not have to go through the traditional notice opportunity to correct. If they don't correct, then come in and ask for a citation in order to abate. If it's an immediate threat to public health and safety, we have the ability to go in immediately.
Okay, great. And then let's see, where's my other questions were and then in the when there's a notice of hearing, it says written notice will be the notice will be sent 10 calendar days to how do you call them?
Appellant?
So I don't want to call them victim. So does that mean could that notice also be done via email, text, or phone, or backed up by that as well?
If there's established methods of communication in addition to mail, that is in addition to and is possible, but the ordinance just requires the bare minimum for establishing the due process, which under law enables someone that is going to potentially have their property rights or related rights, affected, are entitled to notice, and under the law that is mail. So the ordinance says we will provide a mail notice, but if we're in communication with them and we have a cell number or some other form of communication that is an effective method of reaching them, that is possible in addition to the mail service.
Okay, great. And then on the so I'm assuming that in the hearing procedures, and our officers will be able to present their camera evidence as evidence.
Yeah, if it's valuable to the case. It can be presented. It's the hearing procedures don't require formal rules of evidence like you were in court, but nonetheless, if there's anything that's relevant to the case, that can be presented, and then the person who has requested the hearing has the opportunity to present their own evidence or rebut the evidence that the Park District is presenting.
Yeah, and then lastly is, will we be keeping these appeals on, for keeping them as building like a library of precedents, cases as for precedents?
Yes and no. I mean, hearings that will be held are valuable in the sense of if there's a similar case, it can be looked at as persuasive, but it's not precedent setting. Each one has its individual sets of facts and circumstances. But for the Park District's own, administration to understand how it was done in the past is always useful, but not binding.
Okay, so we're not going to be, once these decisions are made, we're not going to keep them for say like a year.
I mean, record keeping will be kept just for our own record keeping purposes, but they're not, I'm sorry, I guess I understood your question. They're not like kept in the sense of like having, value for future cases to be heard and how they'll come out.
And then, I misspoke. This is my last question. So,
Take as many as you want.
regarding the fees, are those fees going to be posted on our website?
So yeah, so the penalties will be consistent with state law, first penalty, second penalty, third penalty. Those can and will be posted on our website. But the costs of staff time are just, the cost of what it costs for, a park ranger to go out and remove, an unauthorized water diversion system or restore a stream bed, whatever the cost is, plus traditional overhead is how we charge them. And then the penalties could have a schedule that is posted.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Director Lang?
Yeah, I just have a couple of things. One is, do we need to notify the person who has encroached? For instance, something comes right out their backyard and they've planted things or set up tables and things. Is there a requirement that we notify them before we remove the items?
Yes. And
If you know who they
yeah,
are.
if we're able to identify who has caused the encroachment, whether it's a storm drain or a patio furniture setup, the first step is still going to be the way that staff handles it now. Informally, a request, please remove it. A lot of this is, hopefully deterrent that we have these tools available and we don't have to use them as often as we would, could. It's more of a deterrent, but if we would need to rise from informal notice and informal communication with the property owner, then it would be, in the form of an administrative citation first, and that would be provided to the property owner or the person causing the encroachment. And it would say, please remove your furniture or your storm drain by X date. So they have an opportunity to correct, and it's provided in a notice with information, the name, the type of the violation, how to correct it, and the timeline to correct it. And all that is required by the ordinance.
Okay, well, that's good. And the encroachment I've seen most often is up at the top of Las Trampas to Mount Diablo Trail, where they've put up hammocks where there's an unbelievable view. So I don't know who did the hammocks, but they're really quite wonderful. And I'm assuming, because it's not near anybody's house really, that our staff could just take those down.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's correct. We would work with staff to establish a procedure that is, effective for those in the field. But generally it would be a posting of if we can't identify who the the responsible party is. It would be a posting at the site saying remove this within X days, or if it's just somewhere that's on the site and we can't identify, we would just remove it and then provide them with notice of how to recover their property if the property is deemed to have value.
Okay. And then my other question is, this sounds very positive and advantageous for the Park District. Are there any negatives to our approving this?
I don't see any. It's really just staff time, but it's really a way to save staff time in the long run because ensuring compliance with
Hmm.
these encroachments have, oftentimes takes a lot of staff time, gets referred to legal, we write letters, and there's often this back and forth. So to have this tool available, the hope is that this will really get those encroachment cases that have been hard to resolve in the past kind of quickly resolved. So my hope is that it saves staff time and protects resources.
Okay, thank you.
So the advantage here, as I'm understanding it, is it provides an alternative to suing someone for civil nuisance.
Correct.
And instead of having to sue these folks, you can enforce the abatement through the equivalent of tickets. Is that, do I have that basically right?
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, in essence, it actually gives two potential avenues outside of a civil proceeding.
Yeah.
Is an administrative ticket, like a parking ticket, but also a process by which if the responsible party does not address the encroachment, it gives staff the ability to go in and remove the encroachment and then charge the property owners the staffed time of resolving that encroachment. So
So it's the equivalent of a self-help authorization where we can just fix it ourselves, even if it's on someone else's land.
it's not self-help because that's like we're trying to, but it's essentially an administrative procedure by which we kind of declare that to be an encroachment. And then we follow the procedures in the ordinance to remove that encroachment. If the majority of these encroachments will be on our property, so we don't need to go onto private property to address the encroachment. If there is a situation in which the unlawful nuisance we need to go on private property to address it, maybe it's
They're polluting our land.
exactly. And that would be, we would give notice and then we would actually follow what cities and counties do is we would go to court and ask for an abatement warrant to actually enter private property.
President Coffey, if I can add to what Jason said, one of the benefits of this type of an ordinance is that you're basically saying we have our ordinance 38. And we're now declaring that if you violate any of the provisions of that, you are now subject to either an administrative citation or this proceeding by where it is declared by virtue of you passing this a nuisance. We don't have to meet the common law or statutory definitions of what those are, which can be quite high. So we're basically saying if you encroach, that is by definition a nuisance, and we can move to take action without having to go through, the whole rigmarole about who is it a nuisance to, who, under the common law.
Can this aid our ability to abate individuals who repeatedly come on our land and alter it or cut fences? I'm thinking of,
Yeah.
the mountain bikers that do that out at Briones. Does this lend us any greater enforcement ability? Maybe have park rangers give them the ability to ticket these people?
So if I would think about this in separate buckets. One is like if it's a continuing violation that is an ongoing violation, we could
Yes,
use
they
the
are.
abatement procedures that way. If it's like a one-time type of violation that is more like park use, so it's, creating a bonfire in the middle of a area that doesn't allow fires or whatnot, that would, in the past, that would be, either a warning or a full criminal citation. Now there's a middle ground, which is this administrative citation. So in the same way that you would issue a parking ticket, you could issue for a park use violation. So I think what you're getting at, if people are cutting fences or cutting down trees, and it's not continuing, it's not like, if we find that someone cut down a tree, you can't say, go put the tree back. It would be, you violated this, so we're going to cite you for that under, and it would be an administrative citation.
Yeah, one of the difficulties is you have to presently, in order to ticket these people, we have to catch them in the act. And they go out in the middle of the night, no one knows they're there, and destroy things, you know, they cut fences and dig trails, actually. And I'm just wondering if this helps in that we don't have to have a police officer out there in the middle of the night to catch them. Maybe we can catch them with cameras and then figure out who they are and issue.
That is correct. Yeah.
So this does help.
Well, I'd like to say that the ordinance does allow the general manager to appoint other officials of the park district, like park rangers, to issue administrative citations. So that's something that if she wants to expand it from police officers, right now it just says police officers can issue them, but she has the authority to add in park rangers. The whole issue of whether or not what you can do with your evidence, I'm not sure that this ordinance actually allows us, you know, per se to say, we've caught you on camera and now we can issue you an administrative citation. But I think that because that still gets into the question of whether, you know, what is this really, it just depends on what the camera catches. And if you can make the case that the person that you think was on camera was really there, you're kind of still getting into a situation where we don't want to make, you know, it's a penalty, it's a financial penalty, it's not criminal. So the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply, but you still want to make sure that you have good evidence that it's that person doing it. So most likely we're going to be citing people who, you know, somebody has seen them in the act of doing that.
All right, you know, what I'm getting at is I know on occasion park rangers are frustrated because they see illegal mountain biking and can't do anything about it except call an officer. Maybe this gives them more tools to do something about illegal mountain biking. And I just want you folks to give some thought to it, because enforcement has been the fundamental problem with the creation of all these bootleg trails out there. And I'm thinking of Brioni specifically. So if it's another enforcement tool, let's think about it and think about how it might be implemented
Yeah, no,
on
for
that,
sure.
on that specific issue that I'm talking about.
Definitely, and we'll take that into consideration. I mean,
Thank
and
you.
this ordinance establishes a structure and a procedure that allows, as Lynn said, the general manager to authorize other individuals in the park district other than police officers to issue administrative citations.
And some park supervisors might like having that authority, some might not, you know, but it certainly may be an additional tool on a very difficult issue for us. Enforcement. Okay, thank you. Anything further? Any public comment on this matter? Anyone? I don't see any hands raised. All right, so we will move to a motion to approve the recommendation to favorably recommend this ordinance amendment to the full board.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. Please call the roll of the committee.
President Coffee,
Aye.
Director Lane,
Aye.
Director Rosario,
Aye.
so moved.
Okay, thank you, Jason. And Lynn. Brings us to item 3, the Roddy Ranch Golf Course Habitat Restoration and Public Access Plan. I think I have seen this or heard this presentation maybe half a dozen times at this point, but go ahead.
Good afternoon, President Coffey and members of the committee. I'm Devin Reef, Principal Planner, here to introduce an important new regional park for its public adoption hearings. The former Roddy Ranch Golf Course is a
Sorry, would
200.
you move the monitor so you're so we can see you
Ah.
Because right now you're drifting off. So, yeah, put it in the center or something. Yeah, something like that.
Ah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. The former Roddy Ranch Golf Course is a 230-acre site in Antioch that is part of the larger Deer Valley Regional Preserve. Lands acquired in partnership with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy. The Roddy Ranch Golf Course Habitat Restoration and Public Access Plan, which is before you, is a balance between the conservation goals of the Park District and the Conservancy and the recreation goals for a growing population center of East County. The opportunity before you today at the committee is to review the work developed over the last few years by Park District staff and Conservancy staff and our consultants, Restoration Design Group. Eddie Willis, our staff planner, will give the presentation on the plan today. Eddie.
Okay, let me adjust. Thank you, Devin. Eddie Willis, planner for East Bay Regional Parks. Thank you, President Coffey and members of the committee for having us today. I'm gonna pull up my screen here. Okay, looks like we can all see that. So I'm very excited about this item. The Park District, in partnership with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy and Restoration Design Group, have been working on this planning project for the last 2 years, almost essentially from the start of COVID. So we learned during COVID, something that we all knew already, but the public learned that parks are essential. I'm really excited to bring this item before you as someone who grew up in East County, who worked for many years in East County at nearby Black Diamond Mines. I think this could be a great asset for the community. So I'll go through how we've gotten to this point in the planning process and some of the details of the plan, and then ask for your recommendation to bring this plan to the full board of directors later this fall. So this plan is primarily a partnership between East Bay Regional Park District and the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy, with support from Restoration Design Group as our lead consultant. And we have also partnered with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and have received funding from the California Wildlife Conservation Board. So this is a multi-agency process. The project itself is located at the Antioch-Brentwood border, just south and east of Black Diamond Mines Regional Preserve, at the edge of the future Deer Valley Regional Preserve. It's closest to the intersection of Deer Valley Road and Balfour Road. The golf course, the former Roddy Ranch Golf Course property, is 230 acres, and it's nested within the larger 3,700 acre Deer Valley Regional Preserve, which is part of an even larger network of East County habitat lands comprising of about 14,000 acres east of Mount Diablo. You can see that in the brown hash marks on the screen. And Roddy Ranch is well suited as an introduction to the Habitat Conservancy system. If we're able to open it after planned adoption and construction, it could be a great way to introduce the public to the Habitat Conservancy lands. So currently we're at about 14,000 acres of lands managed by the Park District. That could grow to 30,000 acres per the Habitat Conservation Plan. So future lands may come online. A little bit about the Habitat Conservancy is it's a multi-agency partnership between Contra Costa County and cities of Eastern Contra Costa County. It may include up to 30,000 acres of protected lands in East County. And recreation allowed on these lands is passive recreation only. So that could include things like hiking, mountain bikes, dogs on leash where allowed. We can have up to 4 staging areas, which are essentially areas where you can park more than 15 vehicles. And we're limited to recreational disturbances of a total of 50 acres. So that includes trails, staging areas, any sort of recreational improvements. And the primary goal of the habitat conservation lands, as its name suggests, is habitat protection and restoration. A little bit of site history is the land which we're calling the future Deer Valley Regional Preserve, of which Roddy Ranch Golf Course is a part of, was purchased by Jack Roddy in the 1970s. He was a former rodeo star in the 50s and 60s, settled in the Antioch area and grazed the land of cattle for many years. In the early 2000s, he saw an opportunity to build a golf course, and there was a golf club up in the hills near his home, which operated from 2000 to 2016. And he sold it to the Park District in 2018, using also funds from the Habitat Conservancy. This is a chart of our planning process to date, and you can see we're pretty far along, close to completion of the formal planning process. In 2020 is when we hired Restoration Design Group to conduct field studies. That was compiled into an existing conditions report in early 2021. And we held a public meeting online to talk about those results of the existing conditions report. That information was put into 3 draft concepts, which we presented to the public in the summer of last year. Those draft concepts were distilled down into a preferred concept, and we conducted the CEQA analysis, or California Environmental Quality Act, earlier this year. And we are ready to present soon a final habitat restoration and public access plan. This plan is guided by these main goals, which are broken into restoration goals and recreation goals. Essentially, the restoration goals are to restore natural grassland habitat and enhance some of the on-site water features into wetland and other aquatic features for habitat. And recreational goals are to provide passive recreational opportunities, connections to nearby regional parks, and so on. We'll do a quick flyover of the site, about a 45-second clip here, some aerial footage. You can see it's a fairly open landscape and existing golf carts on site. This is looking east toward Brentwood and now swinging northeast toward Antioch. And on a clear day, you can see the Sierra. This is footage flying east toward the existing parking lot and future staging area of the former Roddy Ranch Golf Course. And finally, this is rising and looking south toward Mount Diablo and Deer Valley proper. I've got on the screen an aerial or a perspective view of the 3 design concepts, with the yellow dashed and solid lines indicate multi-use trails as well as accessible trails, respectively. So these were ideas that we presented to the public, and we got some feedback. They all contain certain restoration as well as public access features, such as overlooks, vernal pools, wildlife ponds, multi-use trails. And so this feedback was received not only from project staff, but from public officials, the general public, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and CDFW, and was turned into a preferred concept, which I'll share with you momentarily. And from that preferred concept, we essentially fleshed out the habitat restoration and public access plan. So the plan is essentially a narrative of the preferred concept map. We've got a close-up of a perspective or bird's eye view looking northwest toward Black Diamond Mines in the distance. Again, the dashed lines are accessible multi-use trails, and the solid lines are natural surface multi-use trails. The preferred design concept includes many areas of grassland and wetland restoration. So if you are able to see on the screen, those sort of pinkish gray areas that have dashed lines around them show areas of potential restoration impact. And the goal is to recontour the surface, which had been heavily modified when it was a golf course, into a more flowy surface so that rainwater, as it penetrates in the winter, can flow northward, downhill toward those wetland features at the top. And each wetland has dashed lines around it, which is a 300-foot buffer. And then the yellow lines are the multi-use trails, which are primarily 8 feet wide for the most part, except at the, I don't know if you can see my pointer here. This trail right along here and looping around below the parking lot may be narrower than 8 feet, but the rest of the trails, both the multi-use trail to the west and the accessible loop system in the center, will be about 8 feet wide, which is the current width of existing golf cart paths. So we've got about 4 miles of trails, including 1.6 miles of accessible loops. At the bottom right, we also heard from some of our equestrian users. We have a dedicated equestrian as well as bus parking for school groups, separated from the regular parking lot. Picnic area, interpretive pavilion are included around the staging area. I'll show you a couple of illustrations that show what the future park may look like. This is looking over one of the overlooks off the accessible loop trail toward Mount Diablo to the southwest. In the distance are some of the other multi-use trails winding through the gentle hillsides. Okay, that's the concept, and we'll jump to what it looks like currently. There you go. Next, we'll take a look at the illustration of the staging area. At the far right is the parking lot with some trees planted for shade. In the center right is the interpretive pavilion, which may be used by staff naturalists or other groups to interpret the environmental and cultural history of the area, and the accessible multi-use trail in the foreground. And then we'll take a look at what it looks like currently. All right, some features of the Habitat Restoration Public Access Plan itself. One is it's necessary to adopt this plan to open this as a regional park. A major focus is on habitat restoration, including grassland, wetlands, and the removal of many of the concrete paths, many of which are in disrepair. And importantly, the recreation proposed conforms to the Habitat Conservation Plan / Natural Communities Conservation Plan, to include multi-use trails and other features around the staging area. And the Park District is just one of 4 agencies that has to approve this plan. It also needs to be approved by the Habitat Conservancies Board, by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as CDFW. All right, go through some of the milestones here. What I have in bold are the public facing events. So we had a couple of online public meetings, a couple of on-site public events, including an open house and guided tours. And the final step is to bring the plan forward to the district's board of directors, as well as the other partner agencies, decision-making bodies. And we anticipate completing that process in the fall of this year. And we are happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Very well presented, as always. And I want to congratulate our planning staff on the degree of input sought on this plan. I've been there at, I think, every one of the Zoom meetings and the open house, public tours. And I think you just created a lot of access for input from all that are interested in this project, and done a very good job at that. With that, let's go to our committee first, and then we do have some public. Director Rosario?
Yes. I'm just trying to organize my questions here as they're going along. You mentioned that the trails were now we're gonna be 8 feet, which is, I think originally there was some talk about some 4-foot ones versus, so
Mhm.
now they're all gonna be 8 foot wide.
Except for
Except for
the,
that little one
the,
section in the middle.
the eastern loop and lower connector trail would be
Okay.
more narrow than 8 feet.
Okay, and then I wanted to ask what the existing trees that were on the property that are in the, not outside of the parking lot, what those were.
Oh, you're asking about outside of
Yeah.
the golf course
Uh-huh.
property itself? The native vegetation in the hills, especially up into the west, are blue oak, maybe some buckeye trees, but I think primarily blue oak.
And so the thing that struck me about the overview is that there's not going to be any shade in any of those areas along the trails. Is the HCP prohibit planting of even if we introduced blue oaks into that area? Would that be prohibited?
You know, I'm not sure. I do know that Abby Fateman is on the line as well. She's the director of the Conservancy. And our plan calls for some trees around the staging area, some within the drainages, some woody vegetation. But I think I'll turn it over to Brian Holt to answer.
Let me add, just before you address it, Brian, that one of the things I heard repeatedly, either at the Zoom meetings or at the public tours, almost everyone expressing the desire that there be more trees out there for shade, because it's so hot in the summer. So I think it's an important issue for you folks to address, because certainly on the face of it, we would like to incorporate more shade trees out there. It's just a design issue for us.
Thank you, Director Coffey, members of the board, Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails and GIS. Yeah, we have heard the comment regarding shade and the need for shade in this project from the very beginning, both from staff and from external partners and the public. So we've heard that, we've understood that. I think it's important to note that this particular site, its historic ecology is open grassland. A lot of those drainages provide, wetlands and sort of vernal pool habitats that are. This is, as Eddie has said in the past, this is going to be a site to celebrate grasslands, and it's not necessarily the wooded hillsides that you see above this site, and the lower drainages is primary grassland. The concern about planting trees and the challenge about planting trees is, one, it's difficult to get them to establish in places that they're not historically adapted to. It would take a lot. The trees that are there on the golf course were planted as ornamental trees by Jack Roddy in the development of the golf course. So they were heavily irrigated to be able to establish. So we would need to irrigate trees to get the trees to establish. But I think the more the bigger concern for us would be the potential habitat goals here. So again, we have some targeted species that we're restoring the site for. And the concern about trees and shade structures in general that we have heard from the resource agencies, and that we have not on just on this site, but on other sites too, Vasco Hills and some of the other hot properties in that area, is that, essentially those sorts of features that, again, are not consistent with the historic ecology of the site would provide, say, perches for predators who would prey on some of the species that we're seeking to provide habitat to restore, and would just introduce some of those features that would be in direct conflict with some of the restoration goals. So we have heard concerns from CDFW and from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the biologists who essentially have to approve these plans, about including some of those features and their conflicts with the restoration goals of the site. So I understand it is certainly today it's going to be a hot site, a hot park. I know you all have been out there other times of the year, absolutely lovely in the spring and in the fall. I often say some of our parks are early morning and late afternoon parks. And this might be one of those parks. And like I say, a site to really celebrate the grasslands and the habitat that we're seeking to restore. And I do know, like I say, Abby Fateman is on the line with us here too. So she may have some additional input there, but that has been consistently the feedback that we have gotten from the biologists and the ecologists who are responsible for permitting this project.
Question, wouldn't it be an argument to say that the golf course as it was established prevented the encroachment of black oaks into that area?
No, I would not say that, because the golf course is actually a fairly recent phenomenon on that landscape. The golf course, I don't know exactly when it was established. I'm not sure if you know off the top of your head. 2000. So certainly, imagine if there were trees there, they would have worked with that. But I know we could pull up aerial photography that would show you for many, many, many decades that there have not been trees on that site. And like I say, we can look at surrounding properties that are not developed as a golf course and we see the same thing. I mean, the trees that you do see are at higher elevations and maybe on south facing slopes or some of those types of things.
Right. Trails, trees. And then, so how much of the recontouring, how much grading is that going to involve?
That's a great question. I actually don't know off the top of my head. I believe it is accounted for in the plan.
Okay.
Good question. I'll have to look that up.
So again, Brian Holt, I think it's important to recognize that we're at a concept design level on this plan. So this is going to be a long, complicated project. So there's a lot more details to generate in terms of like the specific grading. We're looking forward to working with our design and construction department to start, refining those and doing the more detailed 60% to 90%, designs where you're really going in and understanding the engineering that needs to make it happen. So we're still at the early stages of the concept design here.
The reason I ask is I know because I've met with Jim Hansen and Norman LaForce in the Sierra Club, and they're advocating for an unmowed area strip for trail users. Basically you're extending the footprint of the trail a little bit longer or a little bit wider, and so I just wanted to know if there's that much, if there's a lot of regrading, if there's a call for widening the trails by a couple of feet, would that make a big difference in the actual design?
Well, I think as Eddie mentioned earlier, the majority of the trails are 8 feet wide.
Yeah.
That's standard for park
Yeah,
districts.
that's good to
Certainly
hear.
that's a wide trail. Those that are not 8 feet wide, what I understand from AGM Jim O'Connor is standard practices for operations to mow the sides of the trails. And that does make it a little wider. And I think just by virtue of use for some of those, you'll continue to see areas of vegetation next to there that are, accessible for somebody to basically, step off the trail and onto what is, like I say, open grassland in that area.
Great. And then and my last question is, so So are we going to be able to see the designs as it progresses, or is it going to come back to the executive or the board of directors?
Absolutely. We're always available and always willing to bring this back as it continues forward. I mean, often we like to bring it back and, celebrate our success, show progress. And whenever there is a request to bring it back, we will. I think, one of the things that we had, well, and certainly as design contracts, and there will be initial decision points by the board. Because of course, this is a concept design. We have to talk about, finding money for construction and then moving forward on all those sorts of steps. There'll probably be another number of grant approvals or those sorts of things that we working with Abby on, that will be coming back. And then certainly if there's, and I had a conversation with Director Coffey yesterday, and this also came up on the recent Robertson Ranch opening. We haven't brought forward, say, trail names or some of those things to you. So that would be something that over the next couple of years, as these concepts are designed, we'd, be looking at coming back with, a naming package or perhaps if there's questions or discussion around trail use. Right now, the plan is relatively, what's the right word, is open in terms, it doesn't designate things as who can use what trails or what. It just says that they're, could be accessible to the various users. So certainly it would be appropriate for us to come back at some point with a trail use determination or something along those lines if needed.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
because as we discussed yesterday, you have board members who are very much interested in how wide will those trails be that are less than 8 feet. So if there is a design review process that includes the details of exactly where the trails are going to end up being and how many picnic tables and potential names, and we have the ability on our own to assess whether the entire trail system will have natural shoulders, which is my view. I've been out there enough that I don't see any impediment to the natural surface trails having substantial shoulders by nature, having hiked out there a number of times. So there is a desire. I know we're going to get to Director Lane, but I know Director Lane shared this group's, Norm and Jim and Amelia, interest in having a pedestrian only section of trail. And so when it gets to that phase, that design phase, before you go out for construction, the board would like to have input on those type of issues. Because that's what we hear from our constituents. Our constituents get into that degree of detail. I don't want to usurp the professional role that our planners have, but there are certain issues that are close to home for our constituents, and we have to be involved in that process.
We certainly hear those concerns from our constituents as well, often on these plans. Again, the majority of the trails are 8 feet wide per our ordinance. Those would be trails that would be, open to others. But hear you on those trails that are not 8 feet wide, questions about if they are suitable for true multi-use, sort of, equestrian bikers and walkers, and that's a decision that the board wishes to make. Absolutely hear you and noted, and we would make a point that we would bring that back at the time that we do have those more formal designs to make those determinations.
Thank you much.
I just have one last question.
All right,
And
then we'll
just,
go to Director Lane.
Is
Finally.
on the 4 staging areas, it's mentioned that allows greater than 15 staging areas greater than 15 vehicles. Is there a cap to the size?
There's not necessarily a cap to the size of the staging area. There's a cap to the amount of acreage that we can develop throughout the entire preserve system. So a bigger staging area in one place might result in a smaller staging elsewhere. I will say 15 cars is that's a decent sized staging area for us at the park district. So we've had this conversation in some of the other preserve systems where doing what is called more, access points where you might have 10 cars or, some of those others, provides good access, but wouldn't necessarily count towards that 4 staging areas. So 4 staging areas are more like what we see here at the golf course, which is a larger staging area that does have, the bus parking, equestrian parking, those types of things.
Great. Well, I'm really excited for this. I think this is going to be a really active park. And I look forward to seeing this open. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Director?
Thank you. So, so the staging area that we have, well, I have several things, but the staging area that we have now for Roddy Ranch, does that count as one of the 4 staging areas, or it's already an established one and it does not count?
No, it does count as one of the 4 staging areas. So the, again, the way the regulators, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and CDFW look at it is, from their perspective, that staging area could be converted back to habitat. So the fact that it's there or not doesn't necessarily, that doesn't necessarily really factor into their decision making. So the fact that it continues to be there, it's not necessarily a new impact, but its continued use as a staging area does count as one of the 4.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to talk about the 4 staging areas actually. But when Eddie was talking about our agreement with HCP and talked about 50 acres of total disturbed, is that in this park?
No, that is throughout the preserve system.
And so was that something that was agreed at the same time with the 4 staging areas?
Correct. And that's part of the, Abby might know some of the history better than I do, but that's part of the HCP document.
Yeah, okay, so I have some comments about this. This restriction was agreed to when we didn't have very much HCP East Bay Parks land. I mean, what, we had 4,000 at the time? 5,000? I don't know the exact amount, but I am not really happy with the 4 staging areas or the 50-acre disturbed land when we continue to expand this land. For me, it makes no logical sense to restrict ourselves in this way with land as we expand. So I'm just going to send that out there, and I hope the board members hear this, because it is something to contend with. And then I see our partners, and aside from the restoration design group that we listed, we're the only park district. Everyone else focuses on natural resources, which is what they need to do, and that's what their function is. But I think as often as these plans come before us, that we end up being bullied by the natural resources agencies. We are taking a huge responsibility, not only as we are the land agent for the HCP, and then we manage it. And as far as I can see, we're the only agency saying, oh, remember, there are people. There are visitors, there are human beings who need to have access to these lands. And so I'm really sensitive when we get to these concept plans, et cetera, that we are saying, well, we can't do this because of this botanical or animal or bird. And I think we need to begin to push back more. That's all I'm saying. And you see, I see this with the tree issue as well. I mean, when we look at the property here, this is a pretty good sized property, you know, this and the whole park itself. And when people are saying we need to have some more trees and some more shade in this period that we are looking at, drought, et cetera, we're not talking about thousands of trees. You know, we're talking about occasional trees. And for the wildlife agencies to say, oh, no, you can't add, 5 more trees because hawks will hang out there and destroy our ground, natural resources. I just think we need to push back because I just think they're outnumbering us. And I know they have permit power and all that, but they need to understand that we're dealing with an urbanizing area. And if Roddy is any example, it's going to be used by a lot of people. So we need to be responsive to the people who are going to come here in addition to the wildlife resources.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Director Lane.
I know you work on it,
And I do want to assure you that we do push back.
Yeah.
And I also want to acknowledge our partner, Abby Fateman with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy. Abby understands this, and she has worked with us in a very collaborative way to make that argument with the agencies. And I think we have recently enjoyed a lot more success than we have in the past. And part of that is because of good staff work by people like Eddie, Naomi Laval, Josh Phillips, and some of the others in our stewardship department to really try to make that argument in a very detailed way to the agencies. It's slow, it's painful, but I'm hoping that projects like this will demonstrate success so that we will be able to continue to enjoy success into the future. But we share your concerns.
Thank you, Brian. Then with regard, I'm looking at the wetlands and thinking about everything's drying up now. So I can only wish everybody luck in producing wetlands that are going to continue to be wetlands, because it is just drying up out there. And I would anticipate that in our planning for these wetlands, we are really taking a look at what our sources of water are, because it's downright horrifying currently. Of course, it's going to be 108 where I am today, but be that as it may. Then the other item that I wanted to mention was trails, and you've touched on some really good things and suggestions that have been made to us too. But I'm really aware that as we are talking about trails, from time to time we say, it's been decades since we've added any narrow trails. And I know we have put together our short loop trails and our brochures that reflect those short loop trails. And that has been really well received, because for families who are going to walk with small children and for seniors, to have an opportunity to take advantage of these trails in a more serene setting or parks, I think is really important. And I think it's something that should be added into our concept to talk more. And I think we need a narrow walking only trail at Roddy Ranch. And so right now, the trails that we are indicating are all ones that have been already in disturbed land, or have we added some additional trails?
So for this plan, and I can pull up the map again.
Okay, that'd be good.
Thank you, Eddie.
Just one second here. Go to the concept map.
There it is.
So I think to briefly answer your question, most of these trails that are proposed are not on current alignments. I think one exception is at the far west end. That stretch of the multi-use trail goes down an existing cart path. It was suitable that we, so our landscape architect on the restoration design team really carefully looked at this and had to anticipate where natural erosion might occur, the natural contours of the hill, et cetera, and really put a lot of thought into where these trails would go. And it didn't quite align with many of the existing golf cart paths, with some exceptions being right around the staging area. But for the most part, these are going to be new build trails.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that quite answered your question, but please let
Well,
me
yeah,
know.
that answers one of my questions.
Great.
But it doesn't add a narrow pedestrian walking only trail to the concept, does it? That's not what we have here.
We're kind of going with the catch-all assumption where if we say it's multi-use, that gives us a lot of flexibility. And then when it comes time to operate the park or actually build out these trails, the park district has the ability to designate sections as single use or multi-use. And that's built into the plan that, actually operating this, there is that flexibility built into the plan. We really had to kind of demonstrate where the trails would go so that we can do environmental analysis on it to see what our impact, if any, would be. But then actually operating the trails can come in a later stage. I'll turn it back over to Brian.
Yeah, I think, so I hear your interest in sort of a designated walking trail. Nothing that we're bringing here today would not preclude the ability to do that. And like I said earlier, as the plans are refined and design is developed, I think would be appropriate for us to come back for a trail use determination as we see what these things would look like better on the ground. Like I said, we're really early into this process and a lot can change as you go through a design process from 30% to 60%. So as those designs are refined, coming back and looking at whether something's appropriate as designating specifically for hiking or for some other use. One thing that I do want to say, though, I know a lot of the concern around trail width and trail use often relates to the concerns around trail conflict. And while I don't want to suggest that trail conflict would not happen at this site, it is a different park than, say, Briones or Pleasanton Ridge or some of our other parks. One, because of the open grassland nature, but two, just because of the topography of the site, it's not going to be a super attractive mountain bike destination. So when we're talking about bike use here, I think what you're going to see much more commonly is probably little kids on little Strider bikes than you would, middle-aged guys trying to tear around on trails. So I think that's just kind of the nature of this site and the sort of rolling hills and that sort of thing versus what you would see in some other locations. So all that's to say, if a designated hiking only trail is something that would be appropriate in here, like I say, I think that would be something that, as we refine the design, would be something to consider as how we sign things and how we operate it.
Okay, but you're essentially saying we've already done the environmental work and the negotiations, so there's not going to be any additional trails to these.
Well, that's correct. Yeah, we have worked closely with the resource agencies on this trail plan and have gotten their conceptual buy-off and approval, which we're excited about, because as you know, that can be difficult to get. So, so we're hopeful that this is an implementable plan.
All right. Thank you.
You know, I know these people that our planners do push back on those agencies. It's one of the reasons Clayton Ranch has taken so long to go through a similar planning process is the give and take with those agencies. I just want to have some input on trail width because I want to be comfortable, and people like me be comfortable that oncoming horse or bicyclists can easily move around me, or I can easily move away from them, because the reality out there is bicycles do not actually yield. You know, they don't stop and let you go around them or whatever. It's a kind of a negotiated arrangement that you reach with the bicyclist and who's going to move where. That's been my life experience. So I agree with you. This is not going to be a mountain bike area, but I think it'll get quite a few just ordinary bicyclists.
Sure.
Because it'd be fun to bicycle out there, a relatively flat area, as long as it's not too hot. And I think, you know, you're hearing, and I don't want it to take away from this success. I want to celebrate this new park. I want to celebrate your work, all our planners work on it, celebrate this concept plan. It's all just, you know, awesome stuff that we're doing here. But what you're hearing is the frustration that we deal with, where, you know, I know my constituency, there are lots and lots of little kids out there. And for us to be limited so much on my big issue is picnic tables. You know, I want, and you've heard this with the Byron and Vasco Hills properties and the trails that are going to be coming to us pretty soon. We're limited in the staging area, the ability just to put in shade and picnic tables. And that area around Byron, Vasco, and this, you know, the end of Balfour Road here, it's teeming with kids. And we ought to have the ability to put in a good number of picnic tables and shade. So it's you're hearing that frustration.
And again, we share that frustration.
Yeah.
And so I certainly hear it. I think, like I say, I view this as, I don't want to say it's an iterative process, but this is certainly, you know, this is a plan that we can move forward now. We've got approval, but we're going to continue to see the cities grow in East Contra Costa County. We're going to continue to see the demand go, and our relationship with the resource agencies is forever. And like I say, I'm hoping that we can demonstrate success to where there's a level of comfort amongst the regulatory agencies as they become more familiar with us as a land manager, and they become more familiar with our stewardship practices. They become more familiar with our operations staff and become more familiar with our public safety staff, and all the resources that we bring to the table to manage these preserve areas for public access, that they're going to get more comfortable that, okay, this is a successful model, and we can do habitat restoration and public access at the same time. So I understand, you know, we would love to see more, and my hope is that, you know, proof of concept, and as we build rapport and support with the agencies, that we'll be able to continue to work on those sorts of issues.
That's good to hear, and thank you. Bev?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. And I know you've been pushing back, but you know, you need to let them know the natives are restless here. And natives all over the East Bay are restless, and the East County ones are really restless. And then I wanted to suggest that when you do a list of passive recreation only, you need to include equestrians as
Yeah.
well.
The note is that as well.
Thank you.
Equestrian, certainly an important constituency, particularly out in East Contra Costa County. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Regarding trail width and conversation there, I think more and more as we, with the pandemic and trail width is really important and how our trails are being used. And I think we're seeing more and more, I know I am, I'm seeing more and more families and groups, hiking in groups.
Oh, yeah.
And it's safety in numbers. They feel more comfortable. Plus they're with their friends and their family. And I think that is the hiking in the park has become a social event.
Absolutely.
And I think that is the future of considerations for our trail width. I mean, because I know every time this Bay Area Ridge Trail, our group took up the whole trail width, so, and I think my friends and family, when we go out, we take up the whole trail width, so it is a social phenomenon. I think that we've got these lands and people have discovered them via the pandemic, and I think that's how they're going to be used. So we need to look and plan accordingly. So that's all
Yeah.
I wanted to say. But I think this is going to be a great park, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, and there's going to be more. So thank you.
Parks are forever.
Let's, first, I want to thank our public input publishers, Save Mount Diablo and Sierra Club, I'm having trouble reading the Horseman Association, Amelia, Sierra Club Norman, and California Native Plant Society, Jim Henson. Obviously, we've read these submissions and addressed a lot of what they themselves address, but I wanted to turn it over for public comment if Jim or Norman or both want to have some input. Jim?
Oops.
Go ahead. You have 3 minutes. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, board members and staff. Jim Hanson, California Native Plant Society. I believe we're all looking for satisfying and safe trail experiences for all users that are totally in line with the goal of habitat recreation. And we are asking for a 5-foot shoulder along the lines that the points that you've brought up. Some indigenous oak trees where they appear to belong, as well as occasionally spotted along the trails for shade, and a nature walking trail on the spur trail at the entrance. We do need to try something new when it comes to trails because of the increasing popularity from all sector of the trail users, including equestrians, some of whom don't feel safe on some of the park trails. So we are proposing that the wider 8-foot paved as well accessible trails as well as the 5-foot natural surface trails have a 5-foot mode shoulder. And this is just basically for easier and safer passing. And again, it's in the whole sense of trying something new that is just really sensible for the very reasons that several of you brought up. I'll also talk a little bit about needed tree shade and tree habitat. It does seem like the blue oaks are just naturally occupy certain elevations out in that area. And you can just see it on a Google Earth map and look at a topo map. But there is seems to be a significant area of higher southwest ridge property that I think needs to be looked at in terms of that elevation. And we can't put oaks all across the site for several reasons, one of which is what they're adapted to. But I would ask that you include that as part of your request moving forward, because it does seem like that's the case. Plus, some of the pines will be removed. There are lone oaks. I mean, it's a name of one of the well-known streets out there. There are lone oaks that ecologically fit within those systems, not in the flats, but on the hillside. And in replacement with some of those pines, maybe a well-placed oak replacement it fits in with the ecology and the natural system there. I'll just add as a side note that Commonly landscape construction contracts, as you well know, will include a 2 to 3 year plan establishment period that includes, somebody just getting those plants established with enough water, a little bit of weeding, and that relieves adding responsibilities to park staff. Very common, as you well know, in contracts. And lastly, we do support what Board Member Lane brought up in terms of a walking only trail at the entrance.
Thank you,
we
Jim. Your
appreciate-
3 minutes are up.
I'll just say.
Just finish
there
up.
is a- Sorry?
Go ahead and finish up.
Okay, very shortly. We appreciate the staff has split the lower trail into two, and that this provides an opportunity to have a trail for all ages, including kids and families, to walk and see these pond systems over time. And Director Lane, I'm getting a better sense of your idea of the loop, and I do think by working with the trail with on another section there, that this could be entirely doable. So in sum, we request that while plans go through some tweaking, concept plans, that you ask that a 5-foot mowed shoulder, some added appropriate native trees, and a nature walking trail be part of the Roddy Ranch, incorporated in the Roddy Ranch plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Is there any other public comment?
Yeah, this is Norman LaForce. My video, okay, great, started the video.
There you are. We
I
got
couldn't
you.
raise my hand. Yeah, I'll try to, I'll be brief. I don't want to repeat what Jim has said. I certainly completely support, as spokesperson for the Sierra Club, everything that Jim has identified. I think it's important to have some of the narrow trails for pedestrian use only, as Director Lane has pointed out. And again, this goes back to the issue that if you build a trail for multi-use, people will assume it's multi-use, and it gets very hard to tell people it's not multi-use when they look at it and say, but it's built to be multi-use. And clearly from the pictures that were shown for the presentation, it's very obvious that you can't have multi-use on some of these trails without there being some sort of user conflict when users encounter each other, which means that I think the 5-foot mowing would be an important addition. I don't really see how that really adds more trail, because it's simply mowing existing habitat area next to a trail that would be essentially somewhat disturbed anyway. And that should be something that could be worked out. I think also that, as Jim has pointed out, that the blue oak could be considered native to this area. And certainly, you all know I've been a strong advocate for native habitat, particularly grasslands recovery. I think in this case, and certainly as the club, that a few shade trees would be beneficial to use of the park, particularly for children and families. And that doesn't necessarily impact the native restoration of grassland. It's a large area. The trails aren't everywhere. We're not, as Director Lane pointed out, we're not putting multiple trees everywhere. It is a few trees strategically placed providing shade, because otherwise when it's warm and hot, say between May and October, this park will probably not be used unless people feel comfortable with some shade trees, and I think that would be appropriate. So I would hope that the ideas we put forward would be incorporated into the future planning, and that the Park District discuss this with the various agencies as to how they could be accommodated. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. So back to us. Any further input? Brian?
I've got nothing further to add at this time.
Okay. Abby, do you want to have any closing words for us?
I don't know if they have to be your closing words, but Thank you, President Coffey and members of the board. It has been a lot of work to get to this point, and I appreciate the effort from regional park staff and our consultant team, and also input we've received from members of the public. I'd like to assure you, and particularly in responding to Director Lane's comments, that I have been an advocate and continue to be an advocate for pushing the limits of the recreation elements that we have all agreed to in the HCP NCCP, and that was a document that was adopted, as you know, 15 years ago. It is a little different when we're getting to implementation, and we are finding ways to work with the wildlife agencies and each other to try to maximize our ability to address the concerns and interests from the public and from regional parks boards related to recreation. And we've made some great strides in that area. I'm not going to say that it's perfect, and not everybody's going to be happy with everything that has come up, but it is a work in progress. And I hope that you would consider myself and my team an ally in this effort to create public access in these areas. So I think I just want to say thank you for working on this, and I know it's a lot of work, and I think it's going to be a really great park. So thank you.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you for all your work and effort. So with that, we'll bring it back to the board. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't really say how much I appreciate having another grasslands park like Thurgood Marshall. People don't appreciate grasslands the way they should, as far as I'm concerned, being a grass person. And I appreciate what you've done for and with us, Abby. I really do. I just always feel like I need to bring things up, as you know. And then I do want to say that congratulate staff for moving with the speed of light on the Roddy Ranch property, and say that I'm looking forward to it coming to the board this fall, as well as the Las Trampas land use amendment, which I believe has been going longer. And but I was happy to see how well and pretty efficiently we were able to move to bring Roddy Ranch to us. So I appreciate your work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and so I support the plan as presented, and I just have that caveat that it's subject to design review. Is how I characterize further input from the board and from the committee and the full board. With that, who would like to make a motion?
Oh, I'd like to make the motion.
Director-
Or why don't you make the motion and I'll second it?
There you go.
Oh, I'm deferential to the committee, but sure, I will make that motion as I just described it.
And I'll second it.
Seconded by Director Lane. Call the roll.
Director Coffey,
Aye.
Director Lane,
Aye.
Director Rosario.
Aye.
So moved.
Thank you, Monique. Wonderful.
Thank you very
all.
much. And thank you, Eddie, for really great staff work on this.
Speaking of Oaks, our next topic is item 4, Park District Headquarters, Peralta Oaks North, project update. Lisa.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Barely?
Oh, that was better when you got closer.
Okay, I'll stand closer. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, President Calfee, members of the board. I'm Lisa Gorgon, Chief of Design and Construction, and I'm here to give the introduction for this item. Toby Perry, who's our project manager for this, who's been leading a cross-divisional team on this project, was unable to attend our meeting today. So I'm here with Bren Bates, Capital Program Manager, and we'll be providing this update on this informational item to give you a progress report on the Peralta Oaks North. We call it, it's to renovate the building across the street. And I will just share, we affectionately call it IPON. You might hear that. We call it IPON, which stands for Improve Peralta Oaks North. And that's based on our financing naming procedure that puts the verb first. So I just thought I'd daylight that. Sometimes people say, what's IPON? And so that's what it's listed in the finance enterprise system.
Sounds very bureaucratic,
Well,
but that's what you've.
moving on. So just for some background, I just wanted to remind everyone that the building was purchased in 2019 with the goal of meeting the Park District's need for public safety and administrative space. The board awarded an architectural contract in the summer of 2020. Since then, the project team has provided the board informational updates at the conclusion of each of the program phases, the project phases. So to date, we have provided an update summarizing the building program. Then we've come back to review the board on the progress with the schematic conceptual design phase. And today we're here to review the work done during the design development phase. So this is the phase prior to beginning construction documentation, also known as CDs. Could also be bureaucratic. Okay, so design development phase is where the information about the actual building systems that have been identified to be needed are really designed. So this is where the information about structural, mechanical, electrical systems and the associated costs are developed and estimated. This information informs what costs are associated during construction. And so we call these the hard costs. So these are the costs such as not only the construction contract, but the costs associated with construction management or associated work like site work, or in this case, we know we'll have solar. So those are some of the hard costs. Additionally, at this phase, we also look at other costs that are associated with the total total project to deliver this building. So some of these costs are the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, relocation, permits. These costs are also estimated at this time and are folded in to this phase to look at what the total project will cost. So cumulatively, this is really the time when we look at all the cumulative costs, because we have enough information at the design development phase that we really have a much better sense of what's going on. So when the building was purchased, only the costs associated with the construction contract were contemplated. The cumulative costs really weren't part of what was anticipated at that time. So we're excited, sort of, at this phase to have a lot more information to share with you. So the costs that we're sharing today as part of this overall update is information that we've shared with the general manager in finance. We've been working closely. And we want to ensure that the costs that we're looking at are in line with comparable renovation projects within the region, to know that they are significantly less than the current market cost of a new building that we would purchase or that could be purchased, that the renovation of this building to meet public safety essential services standards has only a minimal impact on the renovation cost due to the seismic upgrades that we've learned are really required for any use of this building. And based on 10 years of searching and staff's understanding of current market conditions, that no less expensive option is likely to become available to house all of public safety and the administrative functions that we've identified. So in addition, staff's analysis of the Park District's financial position and outlook confirms that these project costs are within the scope of available resources, including general fund reserves, unspent promissory notes, note funds, and issuance of new debt. So I just wanted to kind of lay that foundation. And before I turn it over to Ren, I did want to acknowledge and thank all of the staff, some of them are here virtually, who have worked so hard on this project to date. It's really been a cross-divisional team effort. And also, I'd like to thank the board because we've really benefited from your support and in particular meeting with all of us as we looked for your input on the design of the boardroom, the new boardroom. So we really appreciated that. So we're really excited to share with you this milestone, and it includes renderings that really begin to show the look and the feel of what this building will look like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ren.
Thank you, Lisa, for that informative intro. As I pull this up, good afternoon, directors. I'm Ren Bates, Capital Program Manager. What I will share with you now is a little bit more detail of what Lisa went into in her introduction. So we'll talk about the work we've completed to date, and we'll then go into, I'll share the floor plans that have been developed as part of design development. After that, I'll share budget issues, or just the budget, not issues, but how it's all playing out. And then, as Lisa said, we will go into schedule, and then we'll show renderings, conceptual renderings as to what the interior space may look like. Here's an exterior rendering of the building at 2955 Peralta Oaks Court, which is across the street, which we do call IPON. So here's a slide that talks about work completed to date. So as Lisa said, first we have a building program. And so this is what's happened in the 2 years since we've hired Shaw Kawasaki Associates as our architectural consultant. We picked them actually because they worked on the coroner's office right across the street as well. So they have information or knowledge to that end. In a building program, so what happens is what we need to do is we buy a building, we know there's a square footage, and what we need to do is to clarify what can fit into that, figure out what space is required for the different uses. So in other words, sort of like how big the boardroom is or how big restrooms need to be for the occupancy of it. And so at the first stage, we look at what could fit into that building based on square footage. And so that building program then provided us that we would have public safety in their administrative space for park staff. There'll be shared space between the two, and then the boardroom. Also during that time, it was determined that the district would seek to have this building certified as LEED Gold. That wasn't determined until we got into it and had purchased the building. So that was part of the building program. Once we get a building program that has, I'd like to add to that as well, that is that the building program was determined based on needs and not necessarily wants, because when we get into that, you can have people give a laundry list of, this is my wish list. Oh, we have a new building, we can do all of this. And so we look at what the existing uses are and then determine what needs are and move forward from that in terms of defining that. The other thing that we figured or was determined during the programming was that this 2955 would be the public facing building. And so that then precipitated having the boardroom as part of that. The next phase was concept design, and that's where we met individually with the board members to discuss the boardroom layout. We also met with all of the other staff that could potentially be in there. So we met with finance and building services, reservations, public safety, for all of those to figure out how we can move into that. So once we have that, the concept designs, we'd also identified how much administrative staff space would be and how much space would be needed for public safety based on their needs. So we, at that point, then we move into design development, which takes those square footages and those beginning layouts into more refinement. And you can think of these as all refining along the way. So we have sort of a big plan and we start to fit it into the space. And so where we are now is design development. We have finished floor plans. And the next step will be, as Lisa said, to take to construction documents, which we can use for permitting, entitlements, and then move into construction. So as a kind of highlight of design development, these are the areas of scope that we made some decisions on. Again, these are not fully fleshed out. That is part of the construction document phase. And so we will have to detail a lot of these things. But as a first step and part of the design development is determining, what kind of exterior we're going to have, all of the interior finishes, determining sort of a palette, or what we look at as an agency and what we had our architect look at is cost versus durability, and kind of coming to something that is not cheap and will wear out super fast, but not something that's high end and doesn't serve the purpose of what we have to do inside of the building. So these are all of the things we've approached. Our architectural consultant has sub-consultants to help develop all these through the construction document phase. So all the little bullet points that you see are sort of the overarching, and as we progress in the development of these plans and move into construction out so that they can be built, and we have specifics on all of these. So with that, I will begin to show the floor plans that have been developed based through design development, and where we are now. It was a great point to bring to the board so that we can share with you how far we've come along. This first diagram, so the colors show blue spaces are public safety, which pretty much means it's exclusive access to public safety employees. This is the basement building. So if you go into the driveway, you can drive down and around. So this will be mostly used for property and evidence. You'll see there are parking spaces in there. The parking spaces will be for staff only. This is for security reasons. And then there is a little hallway there that's shown as public, but that would be more all staff, because I don't see any reason for public to enter into this way. So, well, I take that back. I believe there are parking spots too on this side of the building on exterior, which could be used by the public. And then they could enter here and take the elevator up, which is here. But I'm not sure how much that would be used. More important, so here's the entry level, or level 1, which is the floor at which you'd enter for coming in as the public. This is also the floor where the boardroom would be. So I'll kind of walk you through this. The green is for district administrative offices space. It would not be accessible to the public. It would be secured by key codes and door locks. Let me see if I can. So this area, so in determining this area up here, this green area has been determined that would be administrative space for the clerk of the board and human resources. It seemed to make that the space was allowed for those uses, and it made sense since the boardroom is going to be in the building for clerk of the board to be over there. Also, as public facing, made sense to have HR over there. Oops, sorry, I went ahead. This green space right here would be the closed session boardroom. So it actually, in talking with board members, we heard that it would be nice to have a way to get from closed session to the dais without having to go out into public space. And so that this plan provides for that. The boardroom is here with the dais set up on this semicircle space. This open space, this also has an additional space to the left, which would be for expansion if we had a big board meeting and or if some sort of other public event. This room will also serve as an EOC, or the emergency operations control, because it is a public safety building. That would be the space that would be provided for that. Other features in the first floor are this green. Let me find this. Oh, right here, this space here is for reservations. As it is now, we have reservations upstairs here, but again, as a public facing building, this would give them a much more space to utilize. And it functions in a similar fashion to how it functions now. This area, this yellow area at the bottom in the middle, sorry, I'm having problems with my cursor, would be the foyer. This circle here highlights where the ficus tree is planted. So there was many discussion about accessibility, how the foyer would operate. And so there was concern about, public just being able to come in and out, and making sure how we check to make sure people are going to the right appropriate places. So there has been added this little green rectangle to the right here. This space here, which would be a reception area. The whole foyer is sort of an open it's an unconditioned space, which means there's no HVAC in there because it's a big atrium sort of area. But this reservation area would actually be an enclosed space for COVID, many of the reasons that we have now, safety, that it would be a small office, but it would be the entry for any public that would come in would be able to enter, they would meet a receptionist, and they could then be directed to where they needed to be. So basically, apologize for that. The only public space would be the boardroom and that entry foyer area. And then if anyone needed to go to seek public safety, there's a way to have that. The one blue space in this that's the public services coordinator for public safety. So that would provide them an office and a space on the base first floor. The next two floor plans are predominantly public safety areas, as you can see by the predominant blue here. And to the right lists all of the different aspects of public safety, which would be on this floor. I won't go into detail of all of those specificities. One thing to note is on this floor, there is an all staff dining room here in the lower left corner, kind of a kitchen area. And this actually has access out to this terrace, which overlooks and looks out to the east. As part of the process of developing this, we worked with public safety as you can see, there's only one door in and out to that terrace. And so for fire reasons and other reasons, there could be conditions that would limit the full use of that terrace. And we heard that if we're going to have public or an all staff kitchen dining area, that they could have access to that full terrace. And so we've accommodated that with the help of public safety of figuring out ingress and egress to that terrace for safety reasons. And here's the third floor. There is a parking lot above the building. And so this would be one way that the public safety could enter. There is a bridge here that enters from the parking lot. That parking lot will be secured for public safety only. And then that would give them access to this third floor. So again, it is predominantly public safety. The one share space in this area is a fitness center. So that would be available for all staff. And to that end, there would be changing rooms and bathrooms here that all staff could use. But then this blue area is lockers only for public safety, that only public safety could access, as well as restrooms for them as well. See if I missed anything on those. So yeah, there is shared space there, but it does provide the safety or security for public safety to have their own locker rooms in that shared space. We'll get into project costs. Here's the number that Lisa was referring to earlier. These are estimated project costs. For each phase, we've had a cost estimate done. And so as we refine the details of the design, we also hone in on the number. So this hard cost, which is, as Lisa referred to, is the full construction cost and includes the solar array system that is proposed as part of that. We've done that at every phase. So in other words, when we did concept, we looked at it, and this number stayed pretty consistent throughout. If anything, it's come down as we've refined the scope and gotten into more detail, but this is the cost as it is. We also look at, as I spoke earlier, value engineering. So it's not like this is extravagant in terms of what the number is. And these costs currently show, or what this breaks out to is this current cost is approximately $589 per square foot for a renovation cost, which is currently comparable to commercial renovation costs in the Bay Area. Some of the major costs of the renovation are due to, as Lisa stated, the structural and seismic dampers and the retrofit. Because of its proximity to the Hayward Fault, we would have to, and because of current building code, it has to be reinforced to 1.5 seismic as opposed to typical 1. And this is irregardless of if it's a public safety building or not and operates as an EOC. So just because of its proximity to the fault and public or building code is that we have to make those seismic reinforcements. In addition to that, the building has sat vacant for many years. And so necessary and it's essential to upgrade the HVAC system, the electrical, the siding as on the outside, and as I said, the seismic reinforcements. I can tell by your, so this also has our construction management costs. It's usually a percentage of hard costs, and that is for the construction management in terms of referring or managing the contractor as we go through the entire process. Soft costs are all of our design costs, permitting costs, utility. Oh, and then permitting. Yeah. So this includes permitting costs. We've already encumbered 3.5 million, and that's how we're paying our consultants. Based on that, this also, so we also have money in there for the furnishing, fixtures, and equipment. That's usually not a hard cost in construction. Our staff architect likes to refer to furnitures, fixtures, and equipment as if you took the building and shook it. Everything that would fall out is something that's not part of the hard cost of construction. So that includes all the desks and everything involved with that. So that gets us to the number you see here. And you might be saying, well, what happened since 2019? And well, this seems so much larger. So I'll talk about a few of those items that are listed here. As Lisa mentioned, when the first estimate was done at the purchase of the building 3 years ago, these items were not included. So we didn't include soft costs as a part of the overall project budget. There was construction management wasn't considered as part of that. We believe that the original costs were based on more of valley costs and not necessarily Bay Area regional costs. And so that had an impact on it. Additionally, in the last 3 years, we've seen lots of cost escalation because of pandemic shortages. We've seen costs increase quite a bit. As I mentioned a minute ago, the furnitures, fixtures, and equipment to make the building operational weren't part of that initial. And then lastly are the LEED Gold certification. And those have costs in both the design phase and the construction phase because of the materials that are used. There's also processing by when we're doing design that we have to have a lot of certification. So in order to get LEED Gold certified, we have to begin in the design process and document things all the way through. And then to that end as well, it predicates certain systems, certain fixtures or furniture, just building systems that then are sustainable. Here's the funding strategy as laid out, as Lisa said earlier. We're looking at utilizing remaining promissory notes, then a mix of general funds and new promissory notes. And then, so that's on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side would be the use of those funds. As I mentioned, we've already encumbered 3.25 for the budget for the design and engineering. There's all the soft costs for permitting. The other thing that we found out is there is a creek protection permit, which is a new creek protection plan, which we have to get a permit for because of the draw, the little creek that's down in front of the morgue. Basically the whole site kind of drains into this draw. I mean, if you drive by, you can see the bridge that enters into the morgue. So the city of Oakland has determined that as a creek, and they have a creek protection permit, which was something that was not contemplated either in terms of our permitting. And so that is another, we're going to have to come back to the board at a certain point to amend some of our consulting to accommodate for some of these permitting issues that have come up. And then additionally, the furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, we're going to add that scope of services, which wasn't an initial, and then the solar aspect, which wasn't part of their initial scope. The schedule has us where we are today. We plan to bring this to the full board on the 20th of this month. After that, we hope to have a neighborhood outreach meeting to let the neighbors know the intended plan of moving forward. We'd like to submit. So design development is basically about a 30% construction document plan. So we would like to move forward once the board has seen all of this to submit plans, 50% construction document plans to the city of Oakland for permitting. And the impetus for that in trying to get it done by November is that building code will change at the end of this year. And so that would add additional layers of changes that we would have to do. So that's why we're sort of pushing now to get plans into the city at a 50%, because then as building code changes in the new year, we're grandfathered in as submitting at this certain time. So there's a lot to it in terms of, we talk about the regulatory agencies for our our landscape projects, but there's a lot with buildings as well. And then hopefully after that, we would like to go out to bid in the fall of 2023 and award a construction contract and then have construction through 2024 to 2025. The future board actions we are anticipating, as I mentioned, we'll need to design our contract amendment. And that is to incorporate the interior design, the solar consultation, and then the design and engineering for the creek protection permit. And then after that, we would hope to award a construction management contract to help facilitate the construction administration. We don't have staff enough. It's beneficial. What we've learned is that construction management firms help us manage these larger projects to help track because staff are already working on many projects of their own. And so construction of a building like this or renovation it's beneficial to the park district to hire construction management. And then lastly, we would come to the board to award a construction contract. So with that, I'll now get into pretty pictures that'll hopefully make it seem a little better. So here's some renderings that the architect has done. This is looking into the boardroom from that foyer entry atrium area. So you can see that it is very nice. Here's a look at the first floor lobby, and this shows the reception area I spoke of earlier. So that it would be enclosed so that it's for safety reasons, can be conditioned and all of those things. So that door right here is a door that leads to where the elevators would be. And so it provides some security so that people can't just free roam and get onto the elevator and go all that way. The other thing I should mention is that this rendering shows a solid back wall here. And what we've heard in talking with staff is that should be a glass or see-through transparent thing so whoever's there has full eyes on the atrium area. This is looking west. So this is looking to where this is the architect's rendering of the existing ficus. It's much larger than that, but it shows the reservations area. It's going to have its own door. So it'll preclude a lot of noise and it gives a little more privacy for those who are sharing their personal information. Here's a close-up of the dais and the boardroom. If I'm going too fast, please let me know. I'm happy to pause wherever. Here's where the third floor breakout area is. So this would be in front of, I think, this is not, so yeah, this is the breakout area in front of where that fitness area would be. So this would be a common space for public safety and all park staff. And then here's the elevator lobby on the third floor. Here is the second floor break room, which has the doors that go out onto that terrace, and that provides a view out to the east. I don't know if I think that should be west. Yeah. And then a look at what the first floor administrative office space could look like. Again, these are just renderings based on the design development. So this is not exactly what they're going to look like. We have to, as a process, we need to go through and decide on furniture. We need to decide on finishes. But these are kind of to give you an idea. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for letting us update you. Happy to field questions as I'm able.
I think as you anticipated, this felt like a gut punch
Yes, sir.
when I saw these numbers. And I just want to start off by asking if 589 a square foot is, you said standard Bay Area for office restoration,
For commercial renovations.
commercial renovations. What is new construction, new commercial construction?
New construction is approximately approaching $1,000 a square foot right now.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better, because when I first saw this number, I said, we made a mistake. We should go get some raw land and build new. We did not anticipate this kind of cost when we bought that building.
Understood.
So with that lead off, I'll turn to Director Rosario. I expected it. You did?
I did. I've asked this before. So why promissory notes versus just pay as you go?
Good afternoon, board members. Deborah Ocker, Assistant General Manager of Finance and Management Services. Very good question, Director Rosario. I'll just start with saying this is a very important and significant investment for the Park District. It meets a lot of important needs that are out there. And I'm very happy to be part of the project team when they meet and talk about key milestones. And we have been working with our financial advisors and the general manager to put together a financing plan. And so promissory notes are a very typical debt issuance that governments use. And it's a way to provide for a long-term investment to be paid for over a long period of time. So general obligation bonds are usually backed by a special tax. Promissory notes or other similar vehicles are usually backed by just general funds of the district, not a special funding source. And that is what we used when we issued our 2012 promissory notes, which was originally issued in order to help secure a building for public safety. And we used those funds for a lot of service yard improvements over the last 10 years. And there is still some funding remaining from those 2012, but it's a similar thinking that you would provide this long-term investment, get a big chunk of money through issuance of debt, and then over a 20-year period, say maybe 25 years, we would make annual payments to pay down that debt. We also are fortunate to have general fund reserves that we are looking at. So to balance the use of general fund reserves and issuance of debt to come up with the right balance for the financing plan. We've been looking at the market of what's going on, the timing of when we would go to construction, and we haven't determined the exact right formula or recipe, but we're working on developing that in the next several months, and we would come back to the board and the finance committee with that financing plan.
I figured. So we're actually borrowing the money from a bank, an outside source, and not borrowing it from our reserves.
No, we're
Correct.
spending
The thinking
reserves.
is that we would go to the market and investors would invest in us and we would pay them principal and interest back.
So have there been any grants identified that would help?
We will always look for grants, but grants for administrative or public safety buildings are rare. Sometimes you can get components of special things that might have to do with public safety, but there are not many grants for tenant improvements for administrative governmental buildings.
Okay. And then regarding the I'm channeling Director Waspy here. the exercise or exercise training room. How big is that actually?
I will turn.
Is there a
that
rendering
over.
for that? Or
I believe the fitness center is not fully developed, but the idea would be that it would be available to all district staff and to public safety personnel. But I don't know the square footage of that space. I'm
okay.
not sure.
Well, the biggest thing is there, I mean, have we polled employees to see how many people would actually avail themselves to the fitness center?
That might have been part of the needs assessment,
Okay.
but I'm not, I'll let Ren respond to that.
I will have to look at the square footage that's on the plan. I don't know that off the top of my head. There was, as I understand, not a poll of who would use it or not. It's, I believe it's based on the fact, I'll have to look at the square footage, and to answer your question, there wasn't a poll done of who would use it, so.
Yeah, I mean, if there isn't a lot of demand for it, maybe that space could be used for something else that we might need. So I'm just throwing that out there. But other than that, no, I expected that this building was going to cost a lot more than we had projected, just knowing the Bay Area economy, and so I'm not surprised at all. And I still think it's worthwhile, and because public safety definitely needs a new headquarters.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can utilize both them, their whole department, plus administrative uses, I think it's well worth it. So I thank you for bringing this to us and keeping us appraised. So thank you.
Sure. I guess I'd like to just add another thing, Director Coffee, to your concern or a question or a comment about new versus renovation. And there's kind of a movement now to reuse old, it's better to renovate. And that's kind of what architects are trying to do, is renovate buildings as opposed to using all new materials to construct something new. And so it's also from a sustainability point of view, kind of a way to renovate. I realize we have to do a lot to that, but the basic structure is kind of there. And so if you think about the materials that would be included, that kind of adds to and why the costs for new construction are higher than a renovation cost. Just as an additional note.
Are the elevators being upgraded or replaced, or are we dealing with old elevators?
They'll have to be upgraded as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to elaborate a little bit more, from a carbon footprint of extracting resources for new steel, new concrete, we're getting to use a lot of what's there already. So I think old timber, those are all part of that sustainability and our lead evaluation.
Director Lane?
Well, I don't think any of us thought that initial estimate was what we'd be dealing with. And I think we knew that it was partial, that it didn't include, people were very clear with us, I thought, that it didn't include a lot of the improvements in soft costs and other items that you've gone over today, but it is it's a large number there. And I think it was really important for you to give us these the sources of, or possible sources of, how we could proceed to pay for this. And this is all Peralta Oaks North. It isn't anything that we're going to have to be doing to improve Peralta Oaks South, right?
Director Lane, that's very true. We envision that this building will continue to get upgraded, especially once this room is no longer a boardroom. And the current public safety headquarters could be repurposed in certain ways as well. So there would be some additional costs to provide some use for those facilities.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad I had a chance to see this before it came to the entire board, because I could have passed out. Since we've had COVID for a couple of years, and one of the things that people have been talking about is circulation in a different way for offices. And also the prospect of people working in new ways, shared spaces, et cetera. How much did some of that new, those new conversations about workspaces inform your planning for North Peralta Oaks?
Sure. It actually was pretty informative, especially in terms of public safety. One of the consultants, there was a sub-consultant, is a public safety consultant that does these kind of facilities everywhere. And so some of so it was incorporated very much there, because they don't need a certain spot. Like they just need a place to land, maybe do a report. And by them, I mean the police officers. And so they have incorporated that in very much into the public safety spot. It's also been incorporated into the locker room space, so that it's, I'm not going to pull it up.
I think kind of this idea of more hoteling, where there's a spot and then people can come, use it, and then leave. So that's both for the lockers, and then also for, well, not necessarily lockers, but instead of everybody, instead of having a huge bank of restrooms, you can go in, use a restroom, and then come back out. And so that's one way with the public safety, in terms of sort of organizing some of the space to make it more flexible. And then also as they're coming and going, what Ren was just mentioning is this kind of hotel style or cafe style is what we heard. And then with regard to the airflow, that was definitely something. I think you were starting to allude to that, Director Lane, and certainly with our circulation system. And Ren, I think you know a little bit more, but just the air filtration system is at that higher level. So
and so administratively though, I guess for staff space, because it is HR, there wasn't. Yeah, that's still being developed. So there's potential, but that space. Yeah, it was looked at. I think we'll look at it more based on the comment that I heard. But it was laid out in such a way that and there's other things that public safety that just require the space that they need. Like it's not about hoteling. They have to have a training room. They have records. They need their dispatch. All of those things are kind of set in their square footage. So the flexibility we have is kind of and the locker room, I don't mean to harp on that, but it's set up such that there wasn't 2 locker rooms. There's lockers and then individual changing stations so that it balances out, because you never know the gender balance of what staff's going to be. And so whether that allows for that flexibility, and that's again in public safety. So, but in terms of office space for looking at what you're describing, I don't think that we'll have to look at that a little more as we go. It's because of the nature of HR and the privacy that's required. I don't think I think that's kind of where we landed in terms of, and the clerk of the board for that matter, about the space requirements for staff in those areas. So, and again, there's only that one spot on the first floor that's mostly administrative space. So the rest is public safety. And I can say for certainty that what you asked in terms of looking at how people work and sort of how to maximize that space was definitely utilized in the public safety spaces.
Okay, well, that's really good. And there's, and so the police are comfortable with the amount of space provided for evidence? Because I know there's been, it's been very makeshift in the current building. It started,
Yep. I see
It's
Chief
not,
Chaparro on the call. I'll defer to him in terms of speaking for public safety and the evidence space.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Chief Chaburro, Chief of Police. I'm also going to defer. I see my communications, property and evidence manager, Patty Gershanik, is here, and she can speak specifically to those details.
Okay, Patty, so you're on evidence, right?
I am. I have kind of all the unique, large, weird areas in the building. So between the dispatch center and property and evidence, those are the unique areas that have to be built in a certain way with a certain size and certain requirements. The property and evidence area actually in the basement is actually substantially larger than the area that we currently have. If you combined all of our storage areas that we currently have between the South County storage yards, our warehouse, and our offsite, it would be approximately the same size. But as we work towards purging, we hope that we will never fill up Peralta Oaks North in our property and evidence. So the only thing that will remain standard is the size of our freezer, as items that have been frozen for evidence have to be kept that way. But everything else, we'll actually have a controlled temperature room, which we can store DNA evidence in instead of having to freeze it. So the space and the amount of attention that's been spent on property and evidence has been a great joy for someone who has to work in the situation that we do right now. So very happy with our basement at the new building.
Okay, thank you very much, Patty. Appreciate that. Then, in looking at the drawings here, there's a lot of glass. So when you're talking about glazing, are you talking about double pane, or how are you going to keep the place cool with all that glass?
Yeah, so the atrium area again is unconditioned. I think they're looking at some film or filters that can be put on that, because replacing a lot of that would be super expensive for double pane. Not to mention, I think it's single pane now. I'll confirm, but looking at that was looking at films and filters that could be applied, and I think other glass throughout the building will be double pane to make sure that keeps the insulation factor and all the things that we're trying to attain with LEED Gold.
Okay, because I think that's, there's a lot of glass there. And I've seen some glazing gone wrong, which may have been inexpensive. I mean, it could have been cheap glazing. But I really would like to see that be an effective protection from the sun on this side. And then, I appreciated seeing the boardroom concept. But I've never seen a dais that wasn't closed. This one looked very, transparent, open, and that was nice. But I still remember in 1980 something when we were doing Little Danville's first dais, that there was bulletproof facility in it. And I'm sorry to say that that's probably true for any dais. So we need to keep that in mind.
Understood. And the dais as designed is much less approachable than the one here. So you can't just walk up the side. You only can access it from the back. And so we're looking into that as we develop it, and your comment is duly noted. So we'll continue to look at that as it's
Yeah,
developed.
well, so I don't have that much problem with approachability, but if somebody comes in, with a weapon, I'd like to be able to duck. Isn't that terrible? But there you are. Okay, I appreciate the information and the pictures and the candor, and we knew it was going to be expensive, and we're going to be around for a long time. So we need to have a building that survives a 5.6 Hayward earthquake, right? Or maybe one that's bigger.
Thank you. Are any fire division administrative offices going to be here? So when we refer to public safety, we're referring to both police and fire services and lifeguards.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, that's the only thing that makes this palatable to me, and I'm sure to the public and the scrutiny this will get, because we know from our surveys that feeling safe, safety on trails and using parks are one of the primary, if not the top interest of our public. And so if this is supporting fire services and police services, it makes it a little easier to digest it. And my own suggestion would be to start referring to this facility as our new police and fire services facility, and make all our public talking points about this building focused on police and fire services, because it's going to be a lot easier to accept when put in that context. So I think that's important. A concern is we're talking about significant debt at a time. It's projected that interest rates are going to shoot up. So the debt's going to be expensive. And we're looking to pull up to $31 million out of reserves, which seems to me sort of an acknowledgement that we didn't anticipate these costs. So I just throw that out there because this is going to be scrutinized, and we need to have, and I think we do have, very good responses. But certainly those issues can be raised. Otherwise, it looks like a terrific plan and a really good utilization of that building. Do you want anything from the board at this point? It's just informational only. Okay.
Yeah, we'll bring it back to the full board on the 20th. That's how we're scheduled. And so.
Anything more from committee members? No, so we're done, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. Okay, well, a couple items left. Public comment on matters not on our agenda. Do we have any public comment requests? Okay, then next will be any closing comments from committee members? I do not have any. Bev?
I was looking at my fall calendar, and so our October meeting is the 28th, right? That you've got here. Okay. No.
Steve, anything?
No, good. I just want to thank staff for all the reports. They're thorough and well done, and just think it was a lot of work. Thank you.
Yeah, Monique, thank you for putting the meeting together.
You're welcome.
And Sandra. And General Manager, any closing thoughts or comments?
No, great meeting. I wanted to say one quick thing on the follow-up on the building. I absolutely share your feelings and your initial feelings of seeing that number, which is why we really needed to put that out there today. So we have spent, since I walked in the door, I think it was my very first day here, staff had me go tour that building. That is what a high priority I understand it is for them. And so we've pushed and scrutinized the new build, scrapping the project altogether. This really is our best option. I've done these before. They're always just painful when you see that number, but it's an investment that the district has to make. We're at capacity in this building, as you know, and beyond the useful life of the public safety building. They've incorporated all of the feedback that they got from you. Absolutely. Thank you, President Coffey, on the sharing your thoughts on the framing of this. We've had a lot of discussion around that. And really, I've been adamant that this is not just a public safety building, that this is the new district's front door. So that's why you saw the reception there, why you see HR there, and the shared space is really, really important to all of our staff. I've spent a career trying to bring together public safety departments with the rest of the agencies. And this allows us with the shared space on the lunchroom and the deck and the lobby to do that. So thanks for your support. It is jaw dropping, but we'll be bringing the financing plan to you later next year for you to finalize. And that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If nothing further.